All right. Greetings. Welcome back to Blackbird News, where everything is connected and all the viewers are smarter than the average bear. Good to see you. We're live on YouTube, Rockfin, and on Twitter. But thanks for hanging out. Thanks for joining in this good old-fashioned book reading. And I realize that we're gonna have to step up the pace if we're gonna make it through this book. But so that means I'm probably gonna have to do more of these than once a week, right? Or we'd be reading this for a really long time. So maybe I'll try it. Maybe I'll do another one. It's a long weekend, Memorial Day weekend, of course. And maybe I'll try and do another one this weekend if I have the energy, the time, and the wherewithal. But anyways, for these book readings, I do ask that y'all donate $1 or more via the direct donation links that are in the description box. Those are the only links that I have in there right now, just so I can make it real simple for you. So if you enjoy the book reading, well, send some love my way, please. Of course, it's free if you can't do it. Right. So we left off with chapter 17. Please let me know too if you can hear everything okay. If there's any issues with the sound, just go ahead and chime on in and let me know. So we're going to get into chapter 18 from the Ministry for the Future. PTSD model uses the word trigger as both noun and verb to suggest the speed of a PTSD reaction and the way it can be switched on by some incident that should be the equivalent of a small curved piece of metal, innocuous except when placed in a gun. Sound is good. Thanks, Bella. One must learn not to pull these things. Cognitive behavioral therapy is a hard thing to learn. One of the main strategies involved asks you to label the type of thought you are having. Identify it as unhelpful or painful, and then switch tracks to a more positive train of thought. Often this strategy fails. You know what's happening, you know it's inappropriate, on it goes anyway. Your palms sweat, your heart pounds in your chest like a child trying to escape. And over that throbbing animal reality, you can be thinking to yourself, wait, no danger here now. This isn't a situation to be frightened in. You're just sitting at a cafe table, midday, light wind, low clouds, all well. Please don't do this. Don't start crying. Don't leap up and run away. Just still your shaking hands. Just pick up your coffee cup. But the trigger is pulled and you are looking right down the barrel of the gun. Enough times like that, and looking down the actual barrel of an actual gun, its trigger under your actual thumb, not your forefinger, because you have the gun pointed at yourself, resting against your sternum, and it's the thumb that can best pull, or in this case push, the trigger. This can be seen as a huge relief, as a promise that the fear will finally stop. This happens all the time. It happens so often that one form of PTSD therapy goes like this. You don't have to worry so much because if it stays this bad, you can always kill yourself. And for some sufferers, this thought is a real comfort, sometimes even the anchor point of a way back to sanity. You can always end the misery by killing yourself. So give it another day and see how it goes. It's not easy to stay unafraid. It can't always be done. Try as you might. Want it ever so much. Things are out of your control, even when they are in your mind, or especially because they are in your mind. The mind is a funny animal. If it were just conscious thought, or if conscious thought was somehow something we could control, or if unconscious thoughts were conscious, or if moods were amenable to our desires, then maybe things could work. Things like cognitive behavioral therapy or the project of sanity itself. Just make it happen. But no, you're swimming in a river. You can get carried out to sea on riptides not of your making, or at least not under your control. You can find yourself swimming against a current much stronger than you. You can drown. Frank was drowning. He had that same shortness of breath. Therapy had mostly made it crystal clear to him that he would never be cured. In a sense, maybe that was progress. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. What did that mean? Could you live without hope? There was a Japanese saying he read in a book, live as if you were already dead. But what did that mean? Why would that be encouraging? Was it encouraging? It was an enigmatic at best, a kind of double bind. First, an injunction to live, but second, as if you were already dead. How would one do that? Was it part of a samurai code? Were you to be careless of your own life in defense of whomever you were charged with protecting? So, a kind of servant's stoicism, to let yourself be used like a shield, to become a human tool. Maybe so, in which case it was a matter of crushing your hopes into the proper channel. Thus, in his case, no more hoping that he would become normal again, that he would have a normal life, that what had happened would not have happened. Forget all that. Therapy taught him to give up those hopes. Hope would have to reside in something like this. Hope to do some good, no matter how fucked up you are. This was worth writing down on a piece of paper in shaky block letters and then pinning the paper onto the mirror in his bathroom, along with various other encouragements in the form of phrases or images. Probably it looked like a madman's mirror, but he wanted to put things up there. Hope to do some good, no matter how fucked up you are. Every time he remembered to brush his teeth or shave, which was getting less and less often, he would see that sign and ponder what he might do. This mainly made him feel confused, but it did seem like the urge to do something was there in him, sometimes so strong it was like a bad case of heartburn. When he was exhausted by sleeplessness or groggy with too much sleep, that burn still sometimes struck him, radiating outward from his middle. He had to do something. Maybe he wasn't going to get to be a child of Kali, clearly not, but something like that, a fellow traveler, a warrior for the cause, a lone assailant. Over breakfast, soothing his stomach with a little plastic tub of yogurt, he pondered what he might do. One person had 1/8 billionth of the power that humanity had. This assumed everyone had an equal amount of power, which wasn't true, but it was serviceable for this kind of thinking. 1/8 billionth wasn't a very big fraction. But then again, there were poisons that worked in the parts per billion range, so it wasn't entirely unprecedented for such a small agent to change things. He wandered the streets of Glasgow, thinking it over, up and down the hills to the east and north, enjoying the sidewalks, so steep they had staircases incised into them. You could work off a lot of stress walking the streets of Glasgow, and the views kept changing their perspectives under the changing weather, reflecting the storms within, the fear, the sudden bursts of exhilaration, the black depths of ocean floor grief, or beautiful dreams, the world gone right, how to share that, how give. St. Francis of Assisi, give yourself away, give up on yourself and all you thought you had. Feed the birds, help people. The positive of that was so obvious. Do like St. Francis, help people. But he wanted more. He could feel it burning him up. He wanted to kill. Well, he wanted to punish. People had caused the heat wave, and not all people. The prosperous nations, sure. The old empires, sure. They all deserved to be punished. But then also there were particular people, many still alive. who had worked all their lives to deny climate change, to keep burning carbon, to keep wrecking biomes, to keep driving other species extinct. That evil work had been their lives' project, and while pursuing that project, they had prospered and lived in luxury. They wrecked the world happily, thinking they were supermen, laughing at the weak, crushing them underfoot. He wanted to kill all those people. In the absence of that, some of them would do. He felt the urge burning him from inside out. He wouldn't live long with that kind of internal stress. He could feel that as surely as he could feel his trip hammer heart pumping overpressured blood through his carotids. Excuse me. Oh yes, high blood pressure. He could feel it trying to burst him from inside. Something in there would break. But first, some kind of action, vengeance, yes, but also preemption, a preemptive strike. This might stop some bigger bad from happening. Twice a week, he visited his therapist, a nice middle-aged woman, intelligent and experienced, calm and attentive, sympathetic. She was interested in him. He could see that. Probably she was interested in all her clients, but for sure, she was interested in him. She asked him what he was doing, how he was feeling. He didn't tell her about his dreams of vengeance, but what he did tell her was honest enough. Earlier that week, he told her a hot waft of steam from a giant espresso machine in a coffee emporium had caused him to freak out. Panic attack. He had had to sit down and try to calm his beating heart. She nodded. Did you try the eye movements we talked about? No. He was pretty sure this was a bullshit therapy, but the truth was, in the heat of the moment, so to speak, he had forgotten about it. I forgot. I'll try it next time. It might help, she said. It might not, but nothing lost in trying it. He nodded. Do you want to try it now? Just move my eyes? Well, no. You need to do it when you're dealing with what happened. I don't want you to re-experience anything in a way that feels too bad. But you know, we've tried having you tell me what happened from various perspectives, and maybe if you're up for it, we could try that again. And while you tell me about it, you could try the eye movements. It would help build the association. He shrugged. If you think it will help. I don't know what will help, but it can't hurt to try this. If it's too upsetting, just stop. Anytime you want to stop, be sure to stop. All right. So he began to tell the story of how he had first come to his town and how the heat wave had at first seemed like all the other hot weather they had had. As he spoke, he moved his eyes, in tandem, of course, as that was the only way he could do it, back and forth, looking as far to the left as he could, vague view of her bookshelves, then in a quick sweep to as far right as he could, catching a vague view of flowers in a vase in front of a window looking out onto a courtyard. This was a voluntary effort that stopped the moment he stopped thinking to do it, so he had to devote some sense of his attention to it, while at the same time continuing with his story, which as a result was halting and disjointed, unrehearsed and different from what he would have said if he were just telling her the same thing again as before. This, he presumed, was one benefit of the exercise. I got there in the winter, so it wasn't that hot to begin with, but it wasn't cold. No. In the Himalayas, it was cold. You could even see the snow peaks to the north on clear days, but most days weren't clear. The air was dirty almost all the time, not that different from anywhere else. So I got settled in and was taking classes in Hindi and working at the clinic. Then the heat wave came. It got way hotter than it had been up till then, but everyone said it was normal, that the time right before the monsoon was the hottest of all. But then it got hotter still. Then it happened fast. One day it was so hot, even the people were scared. And that night, some of the older people and the littlest kids died. That sent everyone into shock, but I think they were thinking it was as bad as it could get. Then it got worse, and the power went out. And after that, there was no air conditioning and not much water. People freaked out. and rightfully so. The heat was beyond what the human body can stand. Hyperthermia, that's just a word. The reality is different. You can't breathe. Sweating doesn't work. You're being roasted like meat in an oven. You can feel that. Eventually, a lot of them went down to the local lake, but its water was like bath temperature and not safe to drink. So that's where a lot of them died. He stopped talking and let his eyes rest. He could feel muscles behind his eyes pulsing at the unaccustomed efforts. Like any other muscles, they welcomed rest. That felt odd. The therapist said, I noticed that this time you didn't really put yourself in the story. No, I thought I did. You always talked about them. They did things. Things happened to them. Well, I was one of them. At the time, did you think of yourself as one of them? No, I mean, they were them, I was me. I watched them, I talked with some of them, the usual stuff. Of course. So could you tell me your part of the story, moving your eyes like that? I don't know. Do you want to try? No. All right. Maybe some other time. And maybe next time we can try to create the bilateral action by having you hold those little buzzers in your hands. Remember I showed you those? They'll pulse left, right as you talk it through. It's easier than moving your eyes. I don't want to do that now. Next time, maybe. I don't know when. You don't want to? No. Why would I? Well, the theory is that if you tell the story, you're shaping the memory of it to some extent by putting it into words. And if you do that while making the eye movements or feeling the hand buzzers, that seems to create a kind of internal distance in you between your memory of the story as you told it and the what you might call the reliving of it, the spontaneous reliving of it by way of some trigger setting you off. So that if that were to happen and you wanted some relief from it, you could move your eyes and start thinking of your spoken version of what happened, and it would relieve you from reliving it, if you see what I mean. Yes, Frank said, I understand. I'm not sure I believe it, but I understand. That makes sense, but maybe worth a try? Maybe. One fall, he took a Scottish friend's offer to work on a project in Antarctica. She was principal investigator of a small scientific team going to the dry valleys to study the stream that ran there briefly every summer, the Onyx River. And she had room in the team on the team for a field assistant and wanted to help him out. Since he was having trouble handling the heat, she said, Antarctica ought to be a great place for him. Sounds good, he said. He was running out of money from a small inheritance left to him by his grandmother, and he still didn't want to contact his parents or his organization, so it would help with that too. And so that fall, he flew to Denver and went through the interviews and altered his resume to omit his time in India, and then he was hired and off to Auckland, then Christchurch, and from Christchurch south to McMurdo Station on Ross Island, just across McMurdo Sound from the dry valleys, which lay between the Royal Society Range and the frozen sea. Even the plane flight to McMurdo was cold, its interior a long open room like a warehouse floor. Same with all the old junky buildings of McMurdo, and the newest buildings too, like warehouses, institutional buildings, and never heated to much more than 60 degrees. Even the line that ran through the buffet and the kitchen was a cool experience, all very congenial. Then, out in the dry valleys, the hut they ate their meals in was kept warm, but not exceptionally so. Really, it was only warm relative to the outside. The dorm huts were a little hot and stuffy, but it was possible to sleep out in a tent of his own. That was really cold, so cold that the sleeping bag he slept in weighed about 10 pounds. It took that much goose down to hold in enough of his own heat to keep him warm. He stuck his nose out of this bag to breathe, but that repeating injection of frigid air reminded him that it was really cold out, even though it was sunny all the time. The continuous light was strange, but he soon got used to it. The problem was that extreme cold somehow led to thoughts of temperature itself. And to warm up their freezing hands after a session of field work, they would heat the dining hut to quite a high temperature, which would make for a stuffy, steamy room, and Frank found himself slipping down the slippery slope. Out at this remove from any possibility of relief, freakouts would be at best inconvenient, at worst a disaster. Medevacs by Hilo were rare and expensive, he had heard them say. So he had to stay cool, but sometimes he could only hide a freakout and hope it would go away soon and not come back. Sometimes he torqued his eyes like he was watching a ping pong match. And they had a sauna hut there. He stayed away from it, of course, but one night, going out to his tent in the bright daylight, he passed it just as a group of scientists burst out of it half naked in bathing suits, shrieking in delighted agony at the instantaneous extreme shift of temperature. Evaporative steam bursting off their bodies like they were big pink firecrackers. That sight, which ought to have been beautiful, and their shrieking, which sounded like pain, though it was ecstasy, set him off instantly. His heart pounded so fast and hard that he went lightheaded, then suddenly fell to his knees and pitched, face first, onto the snow. No warning, just the sight of the pink firecracker people, a racing heart. Then he found himself laid out on the hard, cold snow. He had fainted right in front of them. The sauna-goers naturally helped him up, and someone took his pulse as they lifted him and cried out in panic, "Hey, feel this tachycardia, sorry. My God, feel it." They said it was 240 beats a minute. Within 2 hours, a helo was thwacking down to medevac him out of there. And once medevaced to McMurdo, and his condition and past experiences made fully known to the NSF brass on site, he was accused of lying on his application form and shipped back home. All right, that was chapter 18. I'm going to take a tea break. How y'all doing? Everybody good? Good to see you all in the chats. Thanks for hanging out. I'm just going to check in on these other channels and make sure everything is cool. Rockfinners hanging out on Rockfin. Good. All right. Well, let's get into it to chapter 19. As usual, we're going to do about, roughly an hour, give or take. We had been at sea for something like 8 years. They said they would pay us when we landed, but everyone knew they wouldn't. Wouldn't pay us, wouldn't land us. We were slaves. If we didn't work, they locked us in our cabins and didn't feed us. We went back to work. The food was trash, including fish heads and guts from the take. But it was that or starve, so we ate it. Glad you're enjoying it, Contemplative. Where did I? Okay. It was either that or starve, so we ate it. And we worked. We had to. Set the lines, ran the reels, tried to keep our fingers and arms out of the way. That didn't always happen. The southern Atlantic is rough. The Antarctic Ocean even worse. Accidents were common. Often guys just stepped over the rail into the water. One guy waved goodbye to us before the Whitecaps rolled him under. We knew why he did it. It was probably the best option, but it took courage. You could always imagine something would happen to change things. Then one day it did. A ship came over the horizon. This wasn't unusual. It happened all the time. Not only fishing boats like ours, either slave ships or not. There was no way to tell. But the transport ships that came out to transfer our catch into their holds and resupply us so we didn't have to land, that was the way they did it. We didn't even know what countries they came from. So it looked like a transport ship, and it approached us, and it was clear the captain and his mates thought the same. The people on the ship must have known the signs and fooled them. Then after it came beside us, we had grappled it. Men jumped over the side holding guns pointed at us. We put our hands in the air just like in the movies, but it would have been a funny movie because most of us were grinning, and it was all I could do to keep from cheering. We were herded into the cabins and locked in. When the newcomers came into our cabin and asked us questions, we answered eagerly. Maybe they were just pirates who would put us back to work for someone else, or even kill us. But even so, we told them our stories, and who the captain and every single one of his men were. They left us in there and came back later. Get on our ship, they told us. We did what they said, not knowing what it would mean. All the slaves climbed a ladder onto the bigger ship. There was 8 of us. All the captain's men and the captain were left on board our boat. That was 5 of them. They said some stuff, but the men with the guns ignored them. When we were about 100 meters away, I saw that some of the men on this new boat were filming our old one. Then the bow of our old boat blew up just above the waterline. The boom wasn't very loud, but the bow shattered. There was a bit of flame, but water poured in and doused it. In about 15 minutes, the boat tilted and started going down. Then another explosion in the stern finished the deal. It went down fast. The captain and his men climbed on the roof of the cabin and yelled at us. No one on our savior ship said anything. Everyone just watched it happen. You're killing them, we asked the sailor nearest us. He said, they've got life rafts, right? We don't know, we said. Inflatables, you mean? Yeah, I guess so. So they'll either get those inflated and over the side or they won't. If they don't, they'll get what's coming to them. We'll post film of it on sites that other fishermen will see. If they get off on a life raft, they can try to make it to land. If they manage that, they can tell the story of what happened to whoever will listen. Either way, the point will be made. So that meant these people were probably not police. This was not a good thing, but it wasn't as if we could choose who saved us. What's the point, we asked. No more fishing. Good, we said. It was chapter 19. And then moving on to chapter 20. The Gini coefficient, devised by the Italian sociologist Corrado Gini in 1912, is a measure of income or wealth disparity in a population. It is usually expressed as a fraction between 0 and 1, and it seems easy to understand because 0 is the coefficient if everyone owned an equal amount, while 1 would obtain if one person owned everything and everyone else nothing. In our real world of the mid-21st century, countries with a low Gini coefficient, like a social democracy, are usually a bit below 0.3, while highly unequal countries are a bit above 0.6. The US, China, and many other countries have seen their Gini coefficients shoot up in the neoliberal era from 0.3 or 0.4 up to 0.5 or 0.6. This with barely a squeak from the people losing the most in this increase in inequality. And indeed, many of those harmed often vote for politicians who will increase their relative impoverishment. Thus, the power of hegemony. We may be poor, but at least we're patriots. At least we're self-reliant, and we can take care of ourselves and so on, right into an early grave, as the average lifetimes of the poorer citizens in these countries are much shorter than those of the wealthy citizens. And average lifetimes overall are therefore decreasing for the first time since the 18th century. Don't think that the Gini coefficient alone will describe the situation, however. This would be succumbing to monocausal the love of single ideas that explain everything, one of humanity's most common cognitive errors. The Gini figures for Bangladesh and for Holland are nearly the same, for instance, at 0.31. But the average annual income in Bangladesh is about $2,000, while in Holland it's $50,000. The spread between the richest and the poorest is an important consideration. But when everyone in that spread is pretty well off, this is a different situation than when everyone across the spread is poor. Thus, other rubrics to think about inequality have been devised. One of the best is the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, which is no surprise because the Human Development Index is already a powerful tool, but it doesn't by itself reveal the internal spread of good and bad in the country studied. Thus, the inequality adjustment, which gives a more nuanced portrait of how well the total population is doing. While discussing inequality, it should be noted that the Gini coefficient for the whole world's population is higher than for any individual countries, basically because there are so many poor people in the world than there are rich ones, so that cumulatively, globally, the number rises to around 0.7. Also, there are various ways of indicating inequality more anecdotally. Perhaps we could say in more human terms than such indexes. The 3 richest people in the world possess more financial assets than all the people in the 48 poorest countries added together. The wealthiest 1% of the human population owns more than the bottom 70%, and so on. Also, note that these disparities in wealth have been increasing since 1980 to the present, and are one of the defining characteristics of neoliberalism. Man, I would love to stop and talk about this, but I'm not going to. Anyways, let me see. Inequality has now reached levels not seen since the so-called Gilded Age of the 1890s. Some angles of evidence now suggest this is the most wealth unequal moment in human history, surpassing the feudal era, for instance, in the early warrior priest peasant states. Also, the 2 billion poorest people on the planet still lack access to basics like toilets, housing, food, healthcare, education, and so on. This means that fully 1/4 of humanity, enough to equal the entire human population of the year 1960, is immiserated in ways that the poorest people of the feudal era or the upper Paleolithic were not. Thus, inequality in our time, it is a political stability problem, perhaps in a controlocracy backed by big militaries, no. Is it a moral problem? But morality is a question of ideology, one's imaginary relationship to the real situation, and many find it easy to imagine that you get what you deserve and so on. So morality is a slippery business. So it is that one often sees inequality as a problem judged economically. Growth and innovation, it is said, are slowed when inequality is high. This is what our thinking has been reduced to, essentially a neoliberal analysis and judgment of the neoliberal situation. It's the structure of feeling in our time. We can't think in anything but economic terms. Our ethics must be quantified and rated for the effects that our actions have on GDP. This is said to be the only thing people can agree on, although those who say this are often economists. But that's the world we're in. And so people invent other indexes to try to come to grips with this issue. In fact, we have seen a real proliferation of them. Recall that GDP, gross domestic product, the dominant metric in economics for the last century, consists of a combination of consumption plus private investments plus government spending plus exports minus imports. Criticism of GDP are many, as it includes destructive activities as positive economic numbers and excludes many kinds of negative externalities, as well as issues of health, social reproduction, citizen satisfaction, and so on. Alternative measures that compensate for these deficiencies include the Genuine Progress Indicator, which uses 26 different variables to determine its single index number. The UN's Human Development Index, developed by Pakistani economist Mahbub ul Haq in 1990, which combines life expectancy, education levels, and gross national income per capita. Later, the UN introduced the Inequality Adjusted HDI. The UN's Inclusive Wealth Report, which combines manufactured capital, human capital, natural capital, adjusted by factors including carbon emissions. The Happy Planet Index, created by the New Economic Forum, which combines well-being as reported by citizens, life expectancy, and inequality of outcomes, divided by ecological footprint. By this rubric, the U.S. scores 20.1 out of 100 and comes in 108th out of 140 countries rated. The Food Sustainability Index, formulated by Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, which uses 58 metrics to measure food security, welfare, and ecological sustainability. The Ecological Footprint is developed by the Global Footprint Network, which estimates how much land it would take to sustainably support the lifestyle of a town or country, an amount always larger by considerable margins than the political entities being evaluated, except for Cuba and a few other countries. And Bhutan's famous Gross National Happiness, which uses 33 metrics to measure the titular quality in quantitative terms. All these indexes are attempts to portray civilization in our time using the terms of the hegemonic discourse, which is to say, economics, often in the attempt to make a judo-like transformation of the discipline of economics itself, altering it to make a more human, more adjusted to the biosphere, and so on. Not a bad impulse. But it's important also to take this whole question back out of the realm of quantification, sometimes to the realm of the human and the social, to ask what it all means. What's it all for? To consider the axioms we are agreeing to live by, to acknowledge the reality of other people and of the planet itself, to see other people's faces, to walk outdoors and look around. All right. It's chapter 20. Let's keep going. I'm going to make some progress today on this book. And I keep forgetting where I put my tea. It's right in front of me. Chapter 21. We were on the lakefront in Brissago, on the Swiss side of Lake Maggiore, partying on the lawn of Cynthia's place, just above the narrow park between her property and the lake. She had a celebrity chef there who cooked with a welder's torch he used to fire at the bottom of big frying pans he held in the air, and a band with a brass section, and a light show and all that. Altogether a righteous party, and lots of happy people there, skewing young because that's the way Cynthia likes it. But the narrow stretch of grass between her lawn and the lake was a public park, and as we partied, we saw a guy down there on the shore, just standing there, staring up at us. Some kind of beachcomber dude holding a piece of driftwood. Nothing Cinzia's security could do about him, they told us. Actually, they could if they wanted to, but they didn't. The local police might make trouble if someone were objected to for just standing on a public beach. This is what one of them told us when we told him to make the guy go away. The guy was skinny and bedraggled, and he just kept staring. It was offensive, like some kind of Bible guy laying his morality on us. So finally, a few of us went down there to do what the security team ought to have done and send this guy packing. Edmund led the way as usual. He was the one most annoyed, and we followed along because when he was annoyed, Edmund could be really funny. The guy watched us come up on him and didn't move an inch, didn't say a word. It was a little weird. I didn't like it. Edmund got in the guy's face and told him to leave. The guy said to Edmund something like, "You fuckers are burning up the world with your stupid games." Edmund laughed and said, "Dost thou think because thou art virtuous there shall be no more cakes and ale?" We laughed at that. But then this guy hit Edmund with the chunk of driftwood he was holding so fast we had no time to react. Edmund went down like a tree. Didn't get his hands up or anything. Just boom. He had been cold cocked. The guy held his piece of wood out at us, and we froze. Then he tossed it at us and took off right into the lake, swimming straight out into the night. We didn't know what to do. No one wanted to swim off after a nut like that, not in the dark, and besides, we were concerned about Edmund. It just looked bad, the way he went down, like a tree. Cinzia's security finally joined us, but they only wanted to hold the perimeter. They didn't chase the guy either. It took over checking out Edmund, and when they did that, they quickly got on their phones. An ambulance showed up in about 5 minutes and took him away. After that, it was a couple of hours before we got word. We couldn't believe it. Edmund was dead. Chapter 21. Let's move on to chapter 22. And hold on one second. All right. This may or may not be the last chapter. We'll see. Adele Elia and Bob Wharton were at a meeting of the Scientific Committee for Antarctic Research, an international scientific organization formed to coordinate Antarctic research after the 1956 International Geophysical Year and the 1959 signing of the Antarctic Treaty. Over the years, SCAR had become one of the main de facto governments of Antarctica, along with the U.S. National Science Foundation and the British and other national Antarctic research programs, especially Argentina's and Chile's. The SCAR meeting was in Geneva this year, so it had been a morning's train ride for Adele and Bob, who during their work in the ministry had become friends. Now they sat looking out at the lake from a bar on the second story of the meeting's hotel. Out the window beside their table, they could see the famous fountain launch its spire of water into the air. To the south, a stupendous set of thunderheads, as solid as the marble tabletops in their bar, lofted high over the Mont Blanc Massif. They were enjoying this view in their drinks when they were approached by an American glaciologist they knew named Pete Griffin. Griffin was pulling by the arm another man they didn't know, whom Pete introduced as Slawek, another glaciologist. Adele and Slawek had read some of each other's papers and even attended some of the same meetings of the AGU, but until now had never met. A waiter appeared with a tray of drinks that Griffin had ordered, 4 snifters of drambuie, and a carafe of water with water glasses. "Ah, drambers," Adele said with a little Gaelic smile. This liqueur was what Kiwis always drank in the dry valleys. They informed informed Bob as they took their first sips, when Bob made a face as he tasted it. Griffin explained that long ago a ship filled with the cases of the weird sweet stuff had been stranded in Littleton when its shipping company went bankrupt. And the cases had been warehoused there and over the years sent south for cheap year after year. So they drank a toast to the dry valleys and settled into their chairs. When asked, Slawek said he had spent 5 years all told in the dry valleys, and Adele countered that she had spent 8 years living on glaciers. Pete grinned and topped them both with 12 years total on the ice. They quickly pointed out that he was older and so had an advantage, which he agreed to immediately. Slawek said he had become a glaciologist to indulge his introverted personality while still holding down a job, and Adele laughed and nodded. A lot of us are that way, she said. Not me, Pete declared. I like to party, but really the best partiers are on the ice. Or the best parties are on the ice. He rotated his hand at Slawek as if coaxing him. Come on, Slawek, tell these guys your idea. I think they need to hear it. Slawek frowned uncomfortably but said, You all heard the new data in there today. They agreed they had. Sea level will rise so fast the world is fucked. It couldn't be denied. The others agreed. The data were clear. So, Pete prompted Slawek, I've heard some people suggesting we just pump all the melted ice back up onto the polar plateau, right? Bob shook his head at hearing this. It was an old idea, he said, studied by the Potsdam Institute at one point, and the conclusion of their study had been bleak. The amount of electrical power needed to pump that much water up onto the East Antarctic ice cap came to about 7% of all the electricity generated by all of global civilization. It's too energy intensive, Bob concluded. Slawek snorted. Energy is the least of it. Since 1% of all electricity created is burned to make bitcoins, 7% for saving sea level could be seen as a deal. But the physical problems are the stoppers. Have you run the numbers? No. Say sea level goes up 1 centimeter. That's 3,600 cubic kilometers of water. Adele and Bob glanced at each other, startled. Griffin was just smiling. Slawek saw their look and nodded. Right. It's 600 times as much as all the oil pumped every year. Building the infrastructure to do that would not be feasible, and it would have to be clean energy pumping it, or you'd be emitting more carbon. That much clean energy would take 10 million windmills, Potsdam said. And the water would have to be moved in pipes, and that's more pipe than has ever been made. And last but worst, the water has to freeze when it gets up there. Say a meter deep per year. I don't think you could go any deeper without problems. That means about half of eastern Antarctica. So it's too much in every way, Adele noted. They drank more drambers while they pondered it. Griffin said, Come on, Slawek, get to your idea. Tell him. Slawek nodded. Reality of problems is that glaciers are sliding into the sea 10 times faster than before. Yes. So the reason for that is there's more meltwater created on the ice surface every summer because of global warming. That water runs down moulins until it reaches the undersides of the glaciers, and there it has nowhere else to go, so it lifts up the ice a bit. It lubricates the ice flow over the rock beds. The ice used to be in contact with the rock bed, at least in some places, and usually in most places. The ice is so heavy it used to crush out everything under it. It bottomed out, kilometer thick. That's a big weight. So the glacier scraped down its bed right on the rock, bottomed out ice to rock, even sometimes frozen to rock, stuck. A good percentage of glacial movement at that point was viscous deformation of the ice downhill, not sliding at all. Adele and Pete were nodding at this. Adele was beginning to look thoughtful. Griffin was grinning outright. And so, Bob said. Slawik hesitated, and Griffin said, "Come on." "Okay, you pump that water out from under the glaciers. Melt drill holes like we already do there when we check out subglacial lakes or to get through the ice shelves. Technology is well known and pretty easy. Pump up the water from under the glaciers, and actually the weight of the ice on it will cause that water to come up a well hole 90% of the way, just from the pressure of all that weight. Then you pump it up out the rest of the way, pipe it away from the glacier onto some stable ice nearby. How much water would that be? Bob asked. All the glaciers together, maybe 60 cubic kilometers. It's still a lot, but it's not 3,600. Or 360,000, Adele said, which is what a single meter rise in sea level would be. Right. Also, the meltwater at the bottom of the glaciers is really from three sources. Surface water draining down moulins is the new stuff. Then geothermal energy melts a little bit of the glacier's bottom from below, as always. It never melted much before, except over certain hot spots, but a little. Third source is the sheet heat created by ice moving downstream, the friction of that movement. So, geothermal in most places raises the temperature at the bottom of the glacier to about 0 degrees, while up on the surface it can be as cold as 40 below. So normally the heat from geothermal mostly diffuses up through the ice. It dissipates like that, and so the ice on the bottom stays frozen, just barely, but normally it does. But now the Moulin water drains down there and lubricates a little. Then as glacier speeds up going down its bed, the sheer heat down there increases. So more heat, more melting, more speed. But if you suck the bottom water out and slow the glacier back down, it won't shear as much, and you won't get that friction melt. My modeling suggests that if you pump out about a third to a half of the water underneath the glaciers, you get them to slow down enough to reduce their shear heat also, and that water doesn't appear in the first place. The glaciers cool down, bottom out, refreeze to the rock, go back to their old speed. So you'll only need to pump out something like 30 cubic kilometers from under the biggest glaciers in Antarctica and Greenland. How many glaciers? Pete asked. Say the 100 biggest. It's not so bad. How many pumps per glacier would you need? Bob asked. Who knows? It would be different for each, I'm sure. Would be an experiment. You'd have to keep trying. Expensive, Bob noted. Compared to what? Pete exclaimed. Adele laughed. Jurgen said $1 quadrillion. Slawik nodded, mouth pursed solemnly. This would cost less. They all laughed. Adele said to him, So, Slawik, why didn't you bring this up at the session today? It was about this acceleration of glaciers. Slawik quickly shook his head. It's not my thing. A scientist gets into geoengineering. They're not a scientist anymore. They're a politician. Get hate mail. Rocks through windows. No one takes their real work seriously. All that. I'm not ready for that kind of career change. I just want to get back on the ice while I can still get PQ'd. But the fate of civilization, Bob suggested. Slawik shrugged. That's your job, right? So I thought I'd mention it. Or really, Pete thought I'd mention it. Thanks, Slawik, Pete said. You're a true glaciologist. I am. I think we should drink another round of Drambers to celebrate that. Me too. All right, y'all. That was the end of chapter 22. And I think we're going to leave it there. It's been about an hour, and I'm getting tired of talking and reading and talking. But thanks for hanging out. Thanks for tuning in. Bella says, on average, a chat GPT query needs nearly 10 times as much electricity to process as a Google search. I didn't know that. Good to know. Or maybe bad to know. Something I don't want to know. The power produced by falling water during peak melt periods on Greenland's ice sheet is comparable to the power produced by the Three Gorges Dam in China. Wow. That's a lot of power. The world's largest hydroelectric power dam, Three Gorges. The power is dissipated as heat when it hits the bottom. Good to know. Oh, I didn't read the comment prior to this. AI is poised to drive a 160% increase in data center power demand. Well, pretty much everything we do is poised to increase power demand, right? Everything we do, we're doing all the time. I'm just gonna go over here and check out some people of Rockfin, people of Twitter. See if I have anybody to thank. Of course, thank you for being here. I do appreciate it. You all are super cool. Thanks for hanging out with me for another book reading. I may do another one. I got a tip here from Rick Lefebvre, who says, having your shit straight, unlike many in this fucked up societal dumpster fire we're burning up in. Thanks, man. Thanks for the tip. That was on PayPal. See if we got any others here. Can't seem to work my phone today. I don't know what's going on. But anyways, Twitter people, Rockfin people, YouTube people. Thanks for hanging out. Let's see. Got a coffee from Bella. Bella says there is an ancient warmth to telling and listening to stories. Thank you. Thanks, man. Appreciate the coffee. I guess that was it. I don't know. All right. Well, thanks, everyone, for your eyes, your ears, and your conscience. And thanks for listening today. And I may do another one. I don't know. It's Memorial Day weekend. I'm not really sure what's going on. I will most likely do a show on Monday, but I'm not totally sure. But I'll probably be back. Maybe we'll do this again tomorrow. Or maybe we'll do it Monday. I'm not quite sure. Just keep your eyes open, guys. I haven't decided yet, but I may come back because I want to make some progress on this book reading thing. So maybe I'll do another one tomorrow. Just, if you see follow me on Twitter. I'll post it on Twitter, or maybe you get a notification from YouTube if they're feeling nice. All right, guys. We'll see you till the next time. Peace.